Before I talk about how good Tootin was, before I talk about why you shouldn't have drafted Tez Johnson, I first need to prove that the NFL Combine actually matters, because it's a very obvious statement. Everybody agrees with it, right? The best performers at the Combine are not going to be the best guys in the NFL. That's very easy to understand, and I don't think that there's a single person on this planet that would make that argument. However, I have seen the growing sentiment lately that people think the Combine doesn't matter at all, and I want to prove to you exactly why that is false. So what I did, and if you're a member of flockfantasy.com, you already saw me post all this data on the website, but I went back and looked at the previous 10 seasons, every fantasy relevant option at running back, wide receiver, tight end, and I pulled their Combine numbers to get general trends and to see what we could learn. So exactly what that means is I went and looked at the top 18 running backs every year over the past 10 seasons, and I actually pulled their RAS score, which is their relative athletic score, which essentially combines every little metric you're going to get at the Combine, their 40-yard dash time to measure their speed, their weight to get their size, their vertical to get their explosion, and their 3-cone to get their agility. Now, of course, not every running back tested. Of course, we don't have data points for every single one of these guys, but we have them for 95+%. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to see, oh, okay, well, if you're more athletic, does that mean you're more likely to actually end up being a running back one in fantasy, being a top 18 guy in fantasy? And while, yes, we did not necessarily have a Saquon Barkley level athlete in this draft class, we actually have a phenomenal marker. Because what I have found with all our testing, and you can go through and you can look at the Google sheet, you can look at all this data for yourself, is it's not that the absolute top performers are going to be the best players. What the NFL Combine matters most for me in particular is figuring out who's not strong enough, who's not fast enough, who's not big enough to make an impact at the next level. Because we understand, yes, the college game, it's a lot slower than the NFL. Some of these wide receivers that are able to generate separation, that are maybe able to break away if they're going up against Big 12 defenses, that's just simply not going to be the case if you get thrown into the AFC North. So what we were able to do is we were able to look at minimum thresholds for every single position and come up with guys that, yes, maybe were outliers, but not necessarily metrics you should be betting on. So an example of this is we looked at all those running backs, a list of 180 finishers over the past 10 seasons, and we came up with the minimum threshold that you really want to see an RAS score about 5 and above. Now, of course, if you're up at 9, if you're up at 9.5, that's phenomenal. This is a scale that goes up to 10, but 5 is going to be about average for almost every single position here. And if you are a below average athlete, your probability of being a fantasy relevant option just absolutely craters. So what we actually did here is we took out of those 180 placements, every single player that had an RAS score, so they had enough athletic testing marks to be able to get an RAS score from MathBomb, and we actually came up with about 170 out of those 180. We also decided to remove James Conner from the sample because if you go back to his time at Penn, okay, James Conner was an outlier. James Conner was a dominant sophomore, gets cancer his junior season, doesn't fully recover his senior year, and of course his testing numbers are going to be off. So yes, the prospect that had cancer, I would say that we can remove them from our sample. But what we found is out of that new sample of 165 placements, there are only 15 finishers that had an RAS score under 5, aka were below average athletes, of course more athletic than I am. However, in comparison to the average running back at the NFL Combine. Those finishers were Kyron Williams in 2024, 2023, Ramondre Stevenson in 2022, Mark Ingram 2019, Tariq Cohen 2018, Mark Ingram again 2017, Devonta Smith 2017, Carlos Hyde 2017, Dion Lewis 2017, horrible year for the running back position. That's the year that we finally got a new batch of guys. 2016, Devonta Freeman, Theo Riddick, Mark Ingram, Carlos Hyde, Devonta Freeman, Dion Lewis. But what's actually going to be really interesting about this draft class is looking at how many of these running backs are above average athletes that we're interested in. We'll talk about the 2025 rookies in just one second. I just want to preview what matters at the Combine and how you can use this. If we go through and look at running backs that ran slower than a 4.63, yet they were able to finish as a top 18 running back in an individual season, half PPR, points per game. We had Josh Jacobs, 2024, Kyren, 2024, Kyren also 2023. Really, Jacobs and Kyren have done it a bunch. Ramondre Stevenson did it once. James Robinson did it once. Mark Ingram did it a couple times. Carlos Hyde did it a couple times. Rex Burkhead shows up once. Theo Riddick shows up once. And then LeGarrette Blount did it once. If we look at running backs that weighed fewer than 195 pounds to become fantasy relevant, we had Devon Achane, Kyren Williams, Phillip Lindsay, Tariq Cohen, Chris Thompson, and Deion Lewis did it a couple times. And if we look at running backs that have a vertical under 30 inches, we have David Montgomery, Leonard Fournette, David Johnson, and LaShawn McCoy. And that's about it. So we can come up with these red flags and we can say, oh, okay, well, if a running back weighs less than 195 pounds, that's not great. If a running back can't hit a 30-inch vertical, that's not great. If a running back runs slower than a 4.63, that's not great. If they don't have a RAS score above 5, that's not great. Now, does that mean you can completely scratch these guys off your draft board? No, of course not. I wasn't sitting here telling anybody that they could not draft Josh Jacobs in 2019. But what you can begin to do is you can look at these red flags stacking up and then decide to cross players off your draft board. Because what we have seen is if you combine these red flags, there are very, 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 very few running backs, and I'll give you the list, that can be small and slow, or can be smaller and not super explosive. So this is a big, I don't want to call it mistake. I think it was the right process, and I stand by it, to be honest. But Kyren Williams was a big player that we missed on a couple years back, because you go through and you look at over the past 10 years, fantasy relevant running backs that ran slower than a 4.63 and that weighed fewer than 214 pounds. And that list is Kyren Williams, Theo Riddick, and that's it. So if you see a running back that is both slow and small, scratch that guy off entirely. You can be slow, but a freaking tank, such as Mark Ingram or such as Josh Jacobs, and get the job done. You can be small, but super fast and get the job done, such as Devon Achane. But it'd be small and slow at the running back position. The combine tells us that's a no-go. And 9 times out of 10, if you avoid those guys like Kyren Williams, like Isaiah Spiller, it is going to be the right decision. The only running back to weigh fewer than 220 pounds and have a vertical under 30 inches is LaShawn McCoy. Fun story. My first time ever winning a fantasy football championship was the Chip Kelly year in Philadelphia with LaShawn McCoy as my round 1 pick. So I love the guy McCoy, but ultimately this is an outlier that we're looking at from further than a decade ago, right? So I don't necessarily think we can say, oh, this data is completely useless because a running back that was drafted 20 years ago was able to prove otherwise. No, I mean, it's all about probabilities here. We're never going to be at 100% certainty, but if we can get close to 99%, I'll take that. So again, you can be small, but if you're small, you got to be damn fast and you got to be explosive. Going over and looking at wide receivers to have a RAS score below 5, this actually surprised me because typically I thought, oh, okay, production, really the only thing that matters is the wide receiver position. Don't typically care about what these guys look like at the combine. But you don't have too many names. You have T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson, Robert Woods, Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown, massive, massive outlier, right? Nobody was into him as a prospect. Very similar to Tom Brady. I can come through and tell people, oh yeah, guys that fall outside the top 150 picks in the NFL draft at quarterback, most of the time they're not going to be great. And then people can come hit me with the, oh my God, did you forget about Tom Brady? No, I understand Tom Brady's there, but we're looking at probabilities, right? But yeah, Antonio Brown, Robert Woods, Jarvis Landry, and that's about it. So really, wide receiver, you have to have a good athletic testing score as well, or just not below average. If you look at wide receivers that ran slower than a 4.62 to become fantasy relevant, over the past 10 years, you had one name, Jarvis Landry. Now, maybe you want to hit me with, oh my gosh, Mason, did you forget about wide receiver X? He was the wide receiver 34 in points per game this past season. I got news for you. If you're drafting somebody that has the ceiling to be the wide receiver 34, probably not great. But anyway, if we look at wide receiver size, wide receivers to weigh fewer than 185 pounds to become fantasy relevant, you had Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Tyler Lockett, Deontay Johnson, T.Y. Hilton, and Steve Smith. And if you're looking at receivers to have a vertical fewer than 33 inches, you had T. Higgins, Cooper Kupp, Mike Williams, Calvin Ridley, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarvis Landry, and Jordy Nelson. So really, those are going to be the minimum thresholds that we're looking at, but very similar to what we are looking at running back. You can be one of these receivers and have one red flag. You can be Devonta Smith and you can be extremely skinny, but hell, if you're going to put up the best collegiate wide receiver season of all time and check every other box, you can overlook one red flag with that profile and still draft that guy confidently. I mean, hell, you can be Cooper Kupp and also have one of the best collegiate seasons of all time, don't have a great vertical, and we go, okay, well, I mean, everything else looks decent, so we can overlook that, right? The only two receivers to be lighter than 195 pounds and run slower than a 4.50, Deontay Johnson and Antonio Brown. Again, Antonio Brown, one of the best wide receivers ever, but also one of the biggest outliers ever, and good luck chasing that profile. I'm definitely not going to be able to hit on that. And then going over to tight ends, this is something that I've understood for a very long time. And we actually wrote that Dynasty research book way back in the day, diving into the NFL Combine in depth and a little bit of a different perspective than this exactly. But we found back then that, yeah, tight ends, you need to be super, super athletic, right? So what we did instead of looking at the top 18 tight ends every year is we just looked at the top 10, because ultimately, I mean, here, if you're the tight end 17, you're not helping anybody, right? But interesting enough, tight ends that had a RAS score under 6.5. So 6.5 is higher than the average mark. So you have to be above athletic just to even hit this. You only had Will Dissly, Jordan Reed, Zach Miller. Those were the only guys over the past 10 years to be fantasy relevant. If we're looking at guys that ran slower than a 4.72, you had Zach Ertz, Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz, Will Dissly, Kyle Rudolph, and Zach Miller, Austin Seferian-Jenkins as well. If you're looking at tight ends that weighed fewer than 240 pounds, you had Evan Ingram, Taysom Hill, Darren Waller, Robert Tonyan, and Jordan Reed. And if you're looking at tight ends that have a vertical less than 31 inches, you had Zach Ertz, Will Dissly, OJ Howard. And that's it over the past 10 years that were fantasy relevant. So here, what at least I use the NFL Combine for is, again, not necessarily saying, oh, the guy who runs faster, he's going to be the guy that's better, but more so to come away and go, oh, okay, who's not going to be fast enough? Who would have to be an outlier to hit at the next level? And what is incredible about this year's running back class is, out of these names that you can see on the board right here, there is only one running back that did not hit a minimum RAS score of 5.0. And that was somebody that nobody was really considering in rookie drafts anyway. Anybody that you were excited about. Quinshon Judkins absolutely crushed it. Marion Hampton absolutely crushed it. Travion Henderson looked pretty damn good. Now, Caleb Johnson, hopefully we get some more numbers at his pro days so we can get official RAS score. Same thing, Cam Scatterbo, same thing, Dylan Sampson. But nonetheless, looking at these running backs, I'm not sitting here going, oh, okay, yeah, we have to cross these guys off our board entirely. No, this is a running back draft class that was sold to be top heavy with some of these guys like Genty and Hampton, as well as deep at the same time. And it looks like, based off the NFL Combine numbers we just got, you can maybe be even more confident with that. Now, of course, we can give a shout out to the guys that absolutely crushed it. I know we had Bush on the channel a couple days ago going through and hyping up Tootin. This is somebody that he loved on film. This is somebody that he was super excited about going into the NFL Combine. He runs a 4.32. He has a RAS score of 9.24, and he has a vertical of 40.5 inches. So I already went to flockfantasy.com. I already updated my rookie rankings based off this combine news. And trust me, I'm probably going to be tinkering with these a bit more. I mean, I did get an initial rankings update out there on the side as well regarding the Deebo Samuel trade, just in case you're interested. Obviously, Ricky Pearsall goes up. I do need to move up Juwan Jennings, but nonetheless, I'm going to be updating the rankings on the site a ton. And just in case you haven't seen how you can actually look at the rookies on the rankings page on the site yet, just go to the rankings page as you normally would do. And then with the position buttons where it says overall, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, rookies, you can hit rookies. And we just added tiers to the site as well. So if you go ahead and if you actually select, say, my name, for instance, you can then see my top tiers, right? So you can see, oh, I have Genty in a tier by himself. Oh, I have Tet McMillan then in a tier by himself as well. Maybe we have to consider moving Hampton up there, but nonetheless, all that should be updated on the site, hopefully by the time you're seeing this. And we're going to continue to tinker with that. And you should also be able to see all this NFL Combine data that we're referencing in a post on the site too. And you can find a link to that in the description comment section. But anyway, other running backs that absolutely crushed it. Again, Judkins was a running back that Bush and Danny came on and they said, you know what? He should maybe be ahead of Travion Henderson for reasons X, Y, and Z. Judkins did absolutely crush it. This should be somebody that gets a lot of steam going over the next few weeks. And keep in mind, a big thing that matters, particularly at the running back position when it comes to the NFL Combine, is NFL draft capital. even if we look at a running back that completely bombed the NFL Combine a few years back, that was able to turn into that outlier and absolutely crush it in Kyren Williams. If you remember, Kyren Williams before the Combine was actually being projected to be an NFL round 2 or round 3 pick. And then after the Combine, everybody knew for 100% certainty that he was not going to get selected inside the top 100 picks. So now that you are getting these strong performances from somebody like Judkins, it almost locks him into the very minimum going inside the first 2 rounds. Hampton looks to be a really strong contender to be a round 1 NFL draft pick. Tootin looks like he is almost guaranteed now to at least go in rounds 2 or 3. So, I mean, this running back class looks great. Going over and looking at the wide receivers, the only guy that I think we can kind of confidently knock off our radar, right, is going to be Tez Johnson. His 3-cone actually looks phenomenal. Vertical looks great. His 40 times decent, right? I'm not going to sit here and cross everybody off for running a 4.51. 4.51 is completely fine. But the issue is you weigh 154 pounds. And again, going back to all this historical data that we are looking at, I mean, the wide receivers to weigh fewer than 195 pounds, 195 pounds, okay, is much, much, much higher than 154 pounds. I weigh more than 154 pounds. Come on. And going over and looking at the guys that ran slower than a 4.5, you had 2 names that were able to overcome this. I mean, in reality, if Tez Johnson is able to make a difference from a fantasy football perspective, he'll be the first guy that we have ever seen with that profile. And again, I can't say with 100% certainty he won't be the first guy to do it, but it would be such an outlier. It's not a bet that's worth making. Going over and looking at some other concerning things, you could say like, Isaiah Bond's pretty light and wasn't as fast as maybe people expected. Isaiah Bond already was somebody that was falling down dramatically. But the top names we didn't really get to see. You didn't get to see Tech McMillan. You didn't get to see Igbuka. You did get to see Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden actually goes out there, runs a 4.29. And that's actually really what you wanted to see, right? Because I don't necessarily like Golden from a production profile perspective. I think it's very concerning if you're looking at his yards per route run, his targets per route run, whether you're looking at Texas, Hookah or if you're looking at Houston. But everybody that loves film that's come on the channel to try to convince me otherwise has said, oh, vertical threat. This is going to be somebody that attacks the ball, blah, 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 blah. You know what all the film guys are saying. And yeah, if you're a vertical threat, you need to be fast. The big issue that you had maybe with a vertical threat at Oklahoma State way back in the day that won the Biletnikoff with James Washington is he gets to the NFL Combine. It's like, oh, okay, he's a vertical downfield threat. And then all of a sudden he doesn't display the speed. So Matthew Golden almost locks himself into being a round 1 NFL draft pick at this point. He will be somebody that I think we need to move up our rankings. I think coming into this, we had him at 12. And maybe he needs to move up to like 11 or 10 in our rookie ranks. But anyway, Alec Iomanner is somebody else that absolutely crushes it. I mean, he comes through, RAS score 9.56. I mean, he has a size, which you already knew he was going to, but tests pretty well as well. I mean, it pretty much across the board. Vertical looks good. 40 time looks good. But I mean, a lot of these guys look great. Jalen Knoll has good numbers. Jalen Royals has good numbers. Really, it's a great day for everybody at wide receiver as well. Outside of Tez Johnson, that's going to be the main guy that I think you kind of have to cross off at this point. And going over and looking at the 2025 tight ends, we didn't get to see the top guys test, of course. Harold Fannin wasn't as exciting as people wanted him to be. Gunnar Helm wasn't great. Ultimately, Loveland Warren are going to be the 2 guys that you are interested in, of course, and we didn't get to see them. Hopefully we get to see some numbers at Pro Days. But overall, I think you should be more excited about this year's rookie class than you were at the beginning of the week. Again, no, we don't have Saquon Barkley level athletes here. No, we don't have Julio Jones level athletes. But what we do have is a lot of players that people are excited about the film with, the production profiles with, coming out showing that they are good enough athletes where it's not a concern. And that's going to be the main thing that I care about at the NFL Combine, is just making sure that we don't have to bet on any of these guys being outliers if they were to hit. And that doesn't look to be the case for 99% of these guys. Plus, we had some pleasant surprises as well. So I think it's a great NFL Combine. I think rookie picks are probably going to be going up in value a bit. But again, we've been higher on this year's rookie class than a lot of people, particularly because the running back depth here, which I'm feeling good about. But again, I appreciate you. And if you wanted to check out all this prospect data way more in depth, It's all on flockfantasy.com. We're going to be updating the prospects page as well very soon with the RAS scores, that way you can get the updated FSC grade for all these guys. And the rookie rankings should be live, not only from myself, but the guys at Dynasty Domain, the guys at Dynasty Land, and the guys at Fantasy Stock Exchange. So, of course, if you're not already a member of flockfantasy.com, I'll leave a link in the description. I'll leave it in the comment section. Code FLOCK will get you 30% off any subscription. Plus, I'm actually back reviewing Dynasty teams for new members with code FLOCK. So just go to that personal advice store if you signed up with my code and want me to look at your team for you. But again, I really appreciate you and really hope that we get to see you out with a video sometime soon.